Good evening. It is 6 p.m. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great. Wonderful.
Yes.
Thank you all so much for being on this evening. On behalf of Borough President Antonio Reynoso, I welcome you to this evening's session. This is just the second in a series of trainings that we hope to put on to help give our community board members the tools that you need in order to be the best possible advocates. You've made a commitment to serve your community, and we're making a commitment to assist you in doing that in the best way forward. This training was put together by our land use department, headed up by the Director of Land Use, John Douglas. And with no further ado, because we really want to be respectful of your time, some of you have a training with a council member this evening, so we really want to be mindful of everyone's time. So therefore, I'm going to turn it over to my colleague, John. John?
Thank you, Carol Ann, and thank you everyone for taking the time this evening. I'll try to keep it brief. I know some of you are very familiar with this process.
Can't hear you, John. I'm sorry.
Let's see.
I can hear him.
Hey, John, can
You can't hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
John,
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we can hear you. Yes,
Okay.
we can hear you.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so I'll just try to keep moving. So just, I know some of you are very familiar with this process. Others maybe just seeing it for the first time. So we just wanted to give some basic background on the ULURP process, and then.
John, we still can't hear you. I'm sorry, we can't hear you.
Yes, we can.
We can hear him.
We can hear him clearly.
Yes,
You
I can
can't
hear him
hear
very
him, but we
clearly.
can hear him.
Yes, we can hear you very clearly.
Carol Ann, can you hear them say that? They said they can hear me.
Closer to the mic and the computer.
John, I hear you.
Go ahead, John.
Okay, so ULURP is acronym for Uniform Land Use Review Procedure. This is a public review procedure for certain land use actions outlined in New York City's charter. So today we'll just go over some of these sort of frequently asked questions. Okay, so ULURP process overview quickly. Department of City Planning is basically in the driver's seat here. Once an application for like a rezoning or creating a special permit, anything like that comes to Department of City Planning is certified into ULURP. Community Board has 60 days to, and that's considered, the application is considered complete, and the Department of City Planning typically certifies projects into ULURP at the review sessions on every other Monday. And we can send a copy of the CPC schedule if anyone wants that. It's on DCP's website. But once the application is complete, certified into ULURP, it's automatically is sent to the community boards for review. You have 60 days to review and hold a public hearing on the item and submit recommendations. The Borough President has 30 days to provide his recommendation. City Planning Commission then votes after a public hearing, and they have 60 days to vote. They'll have a binding vote, which we'll go into a little bit later. A City Council also will review and vote for 50 days. They also have a binding vote, and then the mayor, if he so chose, wants to veto the decision by City Council. The council, he may veto the approval or denial, and then council, if they have a 2/3 vote, can certify the application, finish the ULURP process and complete it and approve it. So that's the basics of it, and happy to take questions. I'll just try to get through this as quick as possible, and then we can maybe do a discussion in a few minutes. So ULURP actions are discretionary, which means that they don't have to be given to the applicant. So as opposed to a ministerial action such as a building permit or a CFO. Those things are, basically a list of criteria that once it's met, the city must give them that ministerial action. Discretionary action like zoning map amendment, that's discretionary and can be denied by the city. And so some of those actions, like I said, is zoning map change, site selections for city purposes, housing and urban renewal areas, and certain franchises and major concessions like Verizon's franchise. So who participates in ULURP? The team's broken it down into sort of advisory roles and decision-making roles. Basically, community boards, borough boards, and borough presidents all have an advisory role. So basically, the opinion that the borough president releases is advisory. City Planning Commission, if they vote no, the application is dead. Same thing for council, as well as, if the council doesn't have 2/3 vote, he can also have a binding vote. So who participates? The first step, like I said, Department of City Planning is the main actor here. They are the ones that make sure an application has completed the full amount of environmental review. They're really the ones that make that discretionary, that decision that the application is complete and all the impacts have been studied. So once the City Planning Commission hears the application, it's certified into ULURP and moves to Community Board. Community Board, like I said, has 60 days typically, unless certain actions of very zoning text amendments, you can get a little more time because they're not exactly ULURP, but they're very similar. But like I said, Community Board has 60 days to review, have the public hearing, and vote. Borough President, like I said, has 30 days. The Borough President typically schedules a hearing and will submit his recommendation within the 30 days allotted. And so that City Planning Commission, who themselves also have a public hearing. At times, if it's a large project, they'll also have the public comment period for the draft environmental impact statement. So that's the full environmental review that would have to be done for a large project. Like I said, the mayor has the ultimate vote as well. And then council has that 50 days where they can also vote up and down the application. So ULURP can be challenging. I think there's a lot of concerns about when applications are certified, why they're certifying when they do. That's really, like I said, at the discretion of Department of City Planning once the application is complete. They, even if the department doesn't agree with an application, the process is that they would still be, once it's complete, the application is complete, the applicant still wants to go into public review, it would be certified into review. So that's not something that the borough president control or city council members can control, but it's really just the Department of City Planning that really manages the pipeline. And zoning matters that come through ULURP, I believe, have become more and more complex as there's less and less easy sites to develop in the city with a bunch of parking waivers and height and setback waivers, and they're getting more complex, and that's just a fact. So we know that's a challenge, especially when not every community board has, a trained planner or anyone that's sort of worked for the city for a long time. So, and then, like I said, the community board and the borough president's votes are not binding votes, but they're critical for helping the project improve during ULURP and helping other stakeholders, city planning commission, city council, and mayor to understand what kind of concerns are coming from the people who are directly impacted, and they'll make the decision whether they want to modify or deny or approve the application. So that can be challenging because we can't vote no and then the project stops. It just keeps going. So the Borough President's Office, we're here to provide trainings like this. Happy to answer your questions. I'll put my email in the chat. If there's a specific application that's coming to your community, and you want us to take a look at the actions that they're proposing, look at any impacts, sketch out what the overall development will look like, we're happy to get on the phone with you. We have a team of 4 other planners with us, so if it's not me, it'll definitely be my team of excellent planners that work in the division. Then also provide technical assistance. Our legal, I'm sure some of you talked to our legal counsel here, Gregory Lewis. So if there's an issue around open meetings law or the hearings procedures around ULURP, we're always here to help on that front. some things we can't do that we wish we may be able to do is pause or stop the ULURP clock. Once it's an application certified into ULURP, there's really, except for an emergency like COVID, there will be no way to suspend the ULURP time clock once it's in public review. So that's why we encourage applicants to meet with committee board leaders, other stakeholders before they certify to make sure that into ULURP, to make sure that the community's been heard, that their advice has been incorporated into the project before it gets to ULURP, because the further you get into ULURP, the harder it is to change the application. What Borough President's office cannot modify the application, only City Planning Commission, the applicant, or City Council can do that. So while we may the Borough President may make recommendations, or the committee board makes recommendations, we're not able to modify per se, but the City Planning Commission and City Council may. And then, the Borough President's office is not going to get in the middle of the vote on an application for the Borough Board. And, there's a, we'll say a fine line. There's definitely a clear line between securing exactions from an applicant, exactions. The land use application really needs to be reviewed on its own. And if it's appropriate, the size and density, then it's a yes. And if not, and if the environmental impacts have been fully mitigated or mitigated to satisfaction, you have to have a nexus between what you're asking for from the applicant. So it's a kind of gray area, but make sure that if there is an issue related to that you want to talk about related to having an applicant, donate something or contribute something to the community, we're happy to explain the red lines there. Just quickly, the Borough Board, I'm sure you all know, Borough President serves as the chair, council members representing the borough are a part of the board, as well as the chair people of all the community boards in the borough. So, and that depends on the size of the borough. So I think Staten Island's is the smallest borough board and Brooklyn has the largest. The Borough Board reviews and votes on land use applications that affects multiple community boards. So if it's in CB 6 and 7, the Borough Board would be the one that actually votes on that during ULURP. And I think community boards sometimes decide to have their own separate public hearings, and there's nothing to prevent that. There's nothing that's wrong with that. It's just that in the official process, the Borough Board would need to be the one that submits the recommendations during the ULURP clock. So just to be clear about certifying applications, so once an application is certified into ULURP, there's also an environmental assessment statement that's provided. So the environmental review should be released once the application is certified into ULURP. So that way you'll be able to look at the impacts to open space, to transit, to traffic, to schools, to basically everything, displacement. All those things are found in the environmental review, and those documents are all now have been uploaded by the Department of City Planning to ZAP. We put a link in there. We can send it around as well, but that they've basically linked all of the environmental review documents and the certified application materials on this website by project. So we're also happy to walk through any community board members that need help or want to talk through where we can find different information on this website. It's a really good website. We use it in our department, so we encourage you to take a look at it. It's a really great resource. These are just terms of glossary of terms that I think you all are probably familiar with. We're happy to go through these in more detail. We went over ULURP. Zoning is the thing that regulates bulk and regulations like parking, side yard rules, height limits, and use restrictions. Zoning districts are just one iteration of those regulations. Use groups are a little bit more interesting. They're identified in the zoning resolution, and I'd say maybe a little outdated, but they're important, and zoning districts basically regulate use by use groups in the zoning resolution. So there's a bunch of things in here. Happy to go through them. Mandatory inclusionary housing is something relatively new. Since 2014, the council approved it, and it's a text amendment that requires 25 to 30% or 20 to 30% of the units to be required for affordable housing, regardless of whether they get financing from the city or the state. So it's a program that's in the zoning resolution, so it can be modified through the zoning resolution as well. And then a large scale development, some of you may have seen some of these. They're usually something like over an acre and a half of size of the lot that's being developed. I think the Department of City Planning typically asks them to use a large scale to bind, and in a large scale development, that's a site plan that's the applicant's more bound to than in a regular just rezoning. So, typically it's nice to see a large scale so that you have some control over what the site plan looks like. And this is just like a typical notice of certification document that there's a notice of receipt document, which is just like a draft version, which I had to learn, it's not the same as a notice of certification. So make sure it's a notice of certification. And it should have the ULURP number and the seeker number. The seeker number is a city environmental quality review. It's our version of seeker, SEQR, which is the state version, which is derived from the federal legislation, NEPA, that basically regulates how we measure impacts from a proposed project. So this will also have the project name, a short description of the actions that are requested and what is likely to be facilitated from the project, an applicant, and the contact information. It's usually like this is Richard LaBelle. I'm sure some of you at community boards have met Richard LaBelle. I definitely met with him multiple times in different applications. So that's really the contact that the owner is, allowing. That is a way to get in contact with the owner's interests. So that's the first person. If you want to get in touch with the applicant, that's the first number to call. And we're also happy to connect you with applicants. If you see something, that pops up in the news, feel free to reach out to us again. And then this also gives you the timeline of certification and how long the community board has to vote on the bottom of the certification form. And this is just a closer look at those things. Happy to go into these in more detail, but basically, if it ends with a K in the application number, that's Brooklyn. So if you search ZMK, you'll see Brooklyn items. If you see ZMQ, you'll see Queen items. So look for the ZMK or ZQK for Brooklyn items. And the city is also required to notice the application 30 days before. They can't certify an application before 30 days after noticing that they can certify an application to ULURP. So you'll have a 30-day window where that an applicant will not be able to certify, but after those 30 days, they will be able to certify. And that was a recent legislation that the council passed on that. Yeah, so last few slides, scheduling a hearing for ULURP. Typically, I'm sure most of you are familiar with this, typically the land use committee would, or whatever committee, zoning committee would, have the initial public hearing on the item, get the feedback from the community board, and then make a final recommendation to the full board, and they take a vote. Sometimes, community boards do it all differently. So sometimes they do 2 public hearings, sometimes they just do 1 hearing at full board. So we're happy to help think through that if it's something relatively new to you, but I'm sure there's procedure in a lot of your community boards already. And then also just make sure your public notices appear in the city record at least 5 days before the hearing. And if there's a challenge with that, please feel free to reach out to us. We'll help you access that website, make sure we can give you a template on how to of what to use. So just feel free to reach out on that as well. Ina, I'm sure some of you have met Ina. She helps draft our city record, so with our legal team. So we have some examples if you need them. Best practices, like I said, it's best to meet early and often with applicants. Get your feedback in as soon as possible so that they can make changes. And share your feedback with your council member or the borough president so that we understand your concerns. And when we meet with you, because they reach out to us, and we want to make sure that when they reach out to us that we have your interests and your comments at least at the table when we meet with them. And then holding the hearing within the review period, it may seem sort of a archaic or I don't know, silly that we have the clock, but it really does help get, final resolution on issues if or at least, coming to a stopping point at least. And, making sure that if you can get the recommendations in within the public review period, make sure that one, the borough president can raise the issues that the community board puts in their final resolution with the applicant at his borough president public hearing for ULURP, but also for city planning commission, when they get the application, they can make some potential modifications as well as at city council. So that goes to the last point, which is, it really does help to have some comments about whether you like it or don't like it. If you want us to make it the borough president to make recommendations for changes, it's just helpful to have some sort of description of the issues that were raised, because we won't be able to attend every hearing, community boards, but we do want to make sure the important issues rise to the top. And that is really it for me. So I'm happy to take questions, or just chat if you'd like. And I'll stop sharing.
I have a question.
Sure.
I'm not sure if you can hear me. This is Christine Parker from Community Board 3. Thank you
Yes.
so much for hosting this, and thank you to the borough president for being thorough about the process and making sure that everyone has knowledge of it and re-reviewing for those who are just coming back from the summer. My quick question is, whatever happened with 441 Willoughby in Community Board 3? There seemed to be a lot of brouhaha, and that went in an adverse direction of what our community board and our community was concerned about. Were you involved in that? And if the office was, tell us what happened. Where was the ball dropped during that process?
Yeah, I was not. I know the borough president was here during that period. I was not actually in the city when I know this issue came up. So let me circle back with you, Christine, because I know our office did reach out to DOB, LPC, the council member. So let me connect you with our intergov person who met with all of these people and has really been the point person on this issue. I was not directly involved, but I would certainly get to it. I think I could say, that I think there was some, an agency side issue rather than anything on the public side. So we'll follow up with you though on that one.
Okay, so Anthony Busseret is probably on this call. He is our chair. If you can follow up with him, because I know he's thoroughly engaged in this process. But,
Okay.
This is happening in Community Board 3 consistently, excuse me. And I'm concerned, and I sit on the community board for these reasons, so that we can, in fact, protect our communities like other communities ensured protections. And I'm hoping that as we go forward, we don't have more of these incidents where, it falls through the crack. This one doesn't know, the other one doesn't know, and yet we're still affected, or homeowners are affected, and their generational wealth has been removed from their family lineage. So I'm really concerned about that, and I'm hoping that this level of engagement doesn't stop with a Zoom call.
No, absolutely. I totally agree. And, I think, to be frank, there's a little bit too much falling through the cracks these days in city government. So I totally hear you. And
yeah, but it's in the communities where people of African and Caribbean descent lie. And I'm not saying it's not happening in other places, but there seems to be a disproportionate amount of our communities affected, and no one has real answers.
Yeah. So let's follow up. I'm happy to do that. And it won't end at the Zoom call. And so with Carol Ann, we'll find an opportunity to talk about this issue and make sure we're on the same page with you, the community board leadership, the council member here, and the agencies, and we try to get to the bottom of what happened there, but also just make sure communication is open on all these issues to make sure something like this wouldn't happen again.
John, can I ask you a question? This is Bill Flanoy from Community Board 2.
Sure.
Okay. John, thank you very much. This is a very thorough, presentation for us. Could you just drill down to specifically what the community boards are responsible for and the timeline involved in that?
Yeah, so once the application is certified into Euler, the Department of City Planning should send you a notice in the application that has been certified. It used to be a paper copy. I believe they now send an email. That's what they send to us as a notification with a link to the ZAP portal, which is the application I implement or the web address I put up initially. So once it's certified, that bottom of the sheet of the certification will say the time period of review that the community board has. So it'll be a few days, it'll be 60 days plus a few for administrative purposes, but they'll have like the definitive last date that the Department of City Planning has on the clock for you to submit the application or submit the community board's recommendation. The only thing that's required is to hold the public hearing and submit the city record 5 days to submit a public notice that you're having the public hearing and which item into the city record 5 days before the hearing. And so that process, like if there's any, it was confusing to me when I first involved myself in it. So if anyone has any questions about it, we're happy to do it. But it's really just submitting the public notice to the city record 5 days before the public hearing, holding the public hearing. Like I said, we're happy to work with you on the open meetings law about a hybrid or in person and the quorum that's needed. We're happy to talk through all those things. But typically, so once you have the public hearing, the community board will make its decisions related to whether the land use committee votes it out of committee and goes to city plan, it goes to the full board. But having that full board vote is would ideal, in the Euler process rather than just the land use committee. Once you get the whole community board's vote would be ideal. And then uploading the community board's voted on resolution to ZAP, I believe is how they administer it now. So the community board would upload your recommendation, and then all the other actors, departments, city planning, borough president's office, and city council will all be able to access that. So that's really the three things, and feel free to send us your recommendations. We love to get recommendations and get calls about concerns related to development in your community. So
Sure, but John,
Yep.
thank you very much. But so we get a date that we have to respond by. Is that
Yes.
correct?
Yes.
Okay. And we will, let's say, for instance, you were saying before that things are getting pretty complicated now because of all the different variations that are occurring right now. So let's say, for instance, we get a ULURP action that comes to us that we have to vote on. And let's say, for instance, it's getting kind of complicated. Okay, there's multiple things that are involved in it, a lot of moving parts. Do we get help from you in having to respond to these ULURPs when they're complicated?
Absolutely. Absolutely. We're here. I just put my email in the chat. That's all we're here for, is to help you all and of course advise the borough president. But if there's any questions about the ULURP items that are before you, we can identify, what the implications are from our perspective, help understand what the impacts to the community would be through the environmental review documents, and discuss what potentially could be modified by council and by city planning commission. Like I said, the borough president nor community boards have that binding vote, but we could make recommendations for modifications in ULURP that the city planning commission or city council could make. So we can walk through and try to find some real tangible changes to a ULURP project that are lasting, that we may not be able to affect ourselves, but the other electeds might be able to.
So let's say, for instance, we have a ULURP that comes in and we like the ULURP except for one piece of it. How do we address that?
So I would say, clearly having a meeting with the applicant, understanding why if they need it. I think just asking them this is like critical to their project. That's the first step. Sometimes they're like, no, it's not critical. So they just get rid of it and it's over, or they add something in that doesn't take too much time or effort on their part, probably.
But John, we only have 60 days, is that correct, to respond?
60 days to respond, yeah.
Okay, so let's say, for instance, a ULURP comes in, it comes in 2 days after our land use committee meets. Okay, So then we have to wait a month before the land use committee meets again. So then the land use meeting sees this ULURP and there's some issues in it that we have a problem with. Okay, then we reach out to you because you haven't made a vote on it yet because there's some issues we want to talk about. Okay, so then the clock continues to go, and we have to wait till the next land use committee to vote on it. Okay, so we missed the 60 days to make comments. So let me ask you a question. If the ULURP comes in, how much time do we have as far as turnaround? If we have a question, let's say for instance the chair has a question or some issues, we reach out to you. What's the turnaround going to be on that?
If it's in ULURP, I'm picking up the phone tomorrow. I mean, like now, because we're all hands on deck. I mean, as soon as things are in public review, we have to, turn our attention to that. So we're focused on it. And so you feel free to give us a call and we're happy to walk through all those things with you. And also, so like I said, if before, ideally before ULURP, we would solve some of these problems and these disagreements. If there's an item that doesn't, you don't feel is appropriate, and we can communicate that to other stakeholders and make sure that those concerns are being, like I said, mentioned in every level of government, and hopefully that'll sink in that there are other actors in this process that will also not support that. And I think it's important to just keep those lines of communication open about the issue. If there's a red line, we want to hear about it like as soon as possible, and we'll help advocate and try to make some progress on those issues.
Okay.
So Park Avenue, it's in ULURP, so I'm happy we can talk about that one right now if you want.
Okay. Well, I noticed in the chat I've been told that we have 90 days to respond, and I also been told in the chat that if we have anything as far as comments we want to respond, we can actually send them in writing. Is that correct?
So I'm not sure about the 90-day comment, but I'm pretty sure it's 60 days. Happy to triple check, but 60 days. There's some things that have a text amendment, a zoning text amendment. The Department of City Planning can determine how long they want the public comment period to be. So it's a little bit different with like a zoning text amendment. They're not actually on a ULURP clock. So they refer out maybe for 90 days for a zoning text amendment. But that's just a case by each application. So they could do a text amendment for 45 days, or they could refer it out to community boards for 90 days. So there is that, but that's not the official ULURP timeline. The official ULURP timeline is 60 days for community boards. So if it's an official ULURP action, like a zoning map change, that's 60 days. And then of course, comments can be taken after the public hearing and after the 60 days are up. It's just that we think it's most effective when it's submitted on time and that we have those comments incorporated for the Borough Presidents public hearing, as well as city planning and city council. So I think it's a case of where you want to be effective on your your testimony or not. If you want your testimony to be incorporated, it's better to do it earlier than later.
John, can you give us an either or flow chart that we can follow that makes this a little easier and less confusing?
Sure. There's a
Okay.
there's a flow chart, but there's a few flow charts, so I'll send them all.
Okay, thank you, because it's kind of confusing for us laymen.
I hear you. There's one that interacts with, it shows the environmental review timeline and the Eulerp timeline. I think it helps understand a little bit better. But like I said, if there's any comments or questions about this process, I'm more than available to talk this through with you all. I love this stuff. So
okay, thank you. I appreciate your time.
Yeah.
Excuse me, could I just ask, when you refer to the timeline, is it 60 work days or 60 calendar days?
60 calendar days, and then if it, at least city council rules where I'm not, I'll have to check with Greg and Karina on this, but I believe if the 60-day falls on like a Saturday, you would still have that Monday to submit your recommendation. So if it falls on a non-work day, it's the next work day that counts as that 60th day.
Yeah, but in between, it's 60 straight calendar days. So sometimes, for example, in the Board of Education, when they talk about 60 days, it's actually 60 work days, and it turns out to be, instead of 60 days, it's 80 days.
I see. No, yeah, this one is just it's a straight calendar. It's no not work days.
Okay, thank you very much.
Okay, John, excuse me. So I'm monitoring the chat and the participant, the raise hands. So everyone who wants to speak, either put it in the chat or raise your hands, and I'll let John know the order in which it comes, because it's difficult as the facilitator for him to see who's asking questions.
Thank you, Carolyn.
So I will start with Joseph Doranson and Christine Parker as the next two persons up.
Christian, I think you're on mute.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Okay, while Joseph gets his unmute button worked on, Christine Parker.
Hi, you answered my question. I asked the question. I was the first one to ask the question about Willoughby.
Okay.
So you were able to answer my question. Thank you very much.
Okay, out of the chat, Ellen asked, please describe the racial equity report.
Yeah, so the racial equity reports came out of some legislation at the end of the last city council. They are, the Department of City Planning refers to them as disclosure documents. So there is some guidance on how to properly complete the racial equity report. The racial equity reports have to be completed before the application goes into ULURP. There's some, I think, some size, like the size of the project to qualify to have to do a racial impact. So if it's like a small commercial overlay that's, 5,000 square foot, commercial space, that probably wouldn't trigger it, but there's some threshold I'll send to you all. But basically they take a look at the existing demographics, the current income of existing residents, what kind of market rate, what the market rate is for housing in the community, what the expected affordability of the affordable housing in the project, as well as the market rate units, how much they expect to rent those units for. And typically they show the applicant does an analysis of trend lines in the community. So whether the community is getting more wealthy or if the racial makeup has changed over the recent history, and then they'll analyze how that project would basically satisfy trying to integrate communities by income. So there's a Where We Live report, Where We Live NYC, which is was the last administration's way to respond to the Affirmatively Furthering Fair Housing Act. And that basically wants to make sure that we don't exclude poor and other racial groups from our communities. So the racial equity reports are meant to help decision makers in the ULURP process understand how this project would further fair housing or detract from fair housing. So that's what they're basically for. And I think they have a lot of good information. That they don't make any findings in the racial equity report, which is, I'm sure, what probably people would like to see, which is the department or the applicant making a definitive statement like this project will further fair housing. Typically they won't have that. They'll just say that it meets the goals of the Where We Live NYC report. And if people are interested in that, HPD is, I think, the brainchild behind that one, and we're happy to try to set up a meeting to review that document. It's pretty important. Hope that answered the racial equity. And we can send there's a couple examples. We can I can send to Carol Ann, or I can send to you directly if anyone wants.
Okay. Thank you, John. This question from Musa Hassoun. Does the ULURP process only need approval by the land use committee committee, or does it go to the full CB?
I believe it needs to go to the full community board, but ideally, I believe it needs to go to the full community board. I think there is a little bit discretion, but I think the purpose of the community board vote is to incorporate the full community board vote into ULURP. So sometimes, like the gentleman from CB2 said, sometimes the calendars don't work, and so they don't get to full committee. I think we understand that. It's just, it helps us understand what the full community board really has a vote, what the makeup of the vote was, because sometimes the land use committee is only 3 or 4 folks, whereas the full board is, 50, 60 people. So, it's just a wider breadth of perspectives at the full community board. And we're happy if to help facilitate a conversation with the Department of City Planning about your scheduled hearing schedule and try to make sure that what the gentleman from CB2 said doesn't happen, and that you do get to have a land use committee vote and a full board vote before submitting to ULURP, the final ULURP recommendation.
I think you could probably be a little stronger than that one, John, in that.
Okay, definitely needs to be full board.
Board has authorized the committee to vote on its
That's
behalf, then it has to go to the full board. So there's that little thing. Yes, the committee can do it, but the board has had to have authorized the committee to do so.
Perfect. That's why Carol Ann is here, so I don't get in trouble. Sorry, y'all.
Hey, I'm learning it every day. We have, if you've already asked a question, please feel free to put your hand down in the chat. Fred Batiste and Sarah Lazar are next.
Thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Yes.
Okay, firstly, thank you so much for giving this training. I do have a question with regards to a development that's coming. Earlier this month, the Citizens Budget Commission actually came out with a report in which they are actually making recommendations about changing the Euler process. And just from the initial review that we've done on our side in Community Board 9, some of those really seek to limit the input that community boards and other entities have in that process. Is this something that the Borough President's office is aware of? And and if so, are there any conversations in terms of, how do we get more information about this or discuss this item?
Yeah, I haven't seen that report, so I will look for it. Or also, if you have it, I'd love to see it. So that'd be great. I know that Borough President has mentioned that he's open to changes to ULURP, especially around fully affordable projects that, he'd like to see those move faster through ULURP process, even if that just means he just issues his vote quicker, and not really changing anything officially. I believe any change to ULURP would have to go through a charter revision. So that would be a pretty involved process, but the last administration did 3 of them, so it's not out of the question that it could actually happen. So let us take a look at it, and get back to you on it. But I was not aware that CBC had released that document yet, and I haven't heard from the Department of City Planning that they are actually planning on doing something like that as of now. So I wouldn't be too worried about it moving forward right now. There'll probably be a lot more press about it if it actually was going to move to the charter revision.
And I did put the link for the report in the chat, so it's available for everyone.
Perfect. I'll take a look at it.
Sarah?
Hi, thank you. I'm a member of Community Board 8, and I have 2 questions. So I was wondering if it would be possible to get further trainings, because there are some questions that I have, and as we go through more ULURP processes, the longer we're on community boards, the more we learn. I feel like for example, the part of seeker that sets out the expectations for how displacement risk is evaluated is something that's still kind of mysterious to me. I came into my community board through tenant organizing, and the displacement risk is, you know, an issue of major concern to everybody, but it's very hard to know how exactly um, the developers who were seeking a private ULURP, how they're required to do things, you know, how we can evaluate the analysis that they're producing themselves. You know, and it's also, it can't be unbiased because it's coming from people who have an investment coming through this. And so, yeah, like further trainings on more in-depth issues would be very helpful. And the second thing I wanted to ask, so in Community Board 8 up along Atlantic Avenue, there's going to be a rezoning, there's going to be a Euler process, like a neighborhood process, rezoning rather than a private ULURP application, but there's going to supposedly be a community planning process ahead of this. And I was wondering if you could talk to us a bit more about how these things fit together, if,
Sure.
if you know how they fit together. It sounds
Yeah.
a little confusing.
Yeah, no, it's absolutely confusing. So you're definitely right about that. That's one thing I've learned from public review and land use in New York is it's all complicated. Almost every site is a snowflake. So I've given up trying to, um, understand, ask why, but I try to, find a solution. But the first question is absolutely yes. These are very complicated, yeah, like you said, issues, and we didn't really go into zoning or the environmental review that deeply. And I already told Carol Ann I'm happy to come back and do an in-depth on zoning, on environmental review, on other projects that might come to you all, BSA, things like that. Like we're happy to provide that technical support on those items. Uh, like you said, so I put in the chat the secret technical manual, and it's a bunch of process and procedure on how the Department of City Planning um, certifies or completes the legally required environmental review. So even if a private applicant drafts its own environmental review documents, the Department of City Planning still must certify that work as true and accurate. So while they may pick and choose their facts, hopefully they're facts nonetheless. But that's just one piece, is that there is a little bit of oversight with them, in that they have to follow the procedure in the Chapter 5 socioeconomic conditions section, and they'll have thresholds on the number of units or the square footage that would trigger a detailed analysis. And that whole process, and that's when you kind of get into all the demographics of the community. Those are the things that's when you'd actually get that information from the secret documents. I think there's a lot of concern, like you mentioned, that people have concerns about socioeconomic conditions, even if they don't reach that threshold. And so I think that's what the racial equity report was attempting at some level to do, is to highlight it regardless of whether seeker requires it, and also provide a different lens on review related to furthering fair housing. So I guess that's what I say on those. And then on the last piece of what you're saying, any zoning action, regardless of whether it's a public actor or a private actor, would need to do ULURP. So if they wanted to do a community-wide or neighborhood-wide rezoning, the Department of City Planning would basically be the one that would be paying for the environmental review, or someone, some elected or some agency would be paying for the environmental review, and paying to submit a fully complete application. Some of that might be done in-house by Department of City Planning, but a lot of the environmental review now is contracted out, I believe. So there would be some costs to a community-wide plan that involves zoning actions related to the environmental review specifically. If the community board or council member, or I believe borough president, they can submit applications, ULURP applications, and their fees are waived, so it can reduce the costs of ULURP in that sense. where if there is a shared value, shared understanding of what the zoning should be, and the community board supports it, they could submit their own ULURP and save some of the fees that Department of City Planning charges. I think zoning actions typically don't satisfy community members' desires or what they want to see the outcomes, because zoning doesn't really regulate the facade work, or sometimes it doesn't really regulate. We don't even know what the building's going to look like if it's a non-contextual zoning district. So I think there's some once the community has a vision, I don't know if zoning is going to solve every issue that comes up during that community planning process, but hopefully out of that process there would be some action that could be taken that furthers the community's goals. So there's the same process, but in terms of the official public review, but doing the outreach as a community, and coming up with a vision is also valuable on its own, and it can be brought to and the community boards can do 197A plans. They can do their own community plans. Those are also advisory to the Department of City Planning. I can go into that detail, but that's basically like a comprehensive plan for each community district, community board. But they're advisory, and sometimes the Department of City Planning doesn't really recognize them if they don't agree with the outcome typically. So those are some of the options around those things.
Yeah, I don't think I thought I heard that 197A plans, they've never been incorporated by
I
city
think
planning.
I think people sometimes definitely not. They're not accepted, and then there's some that they accept portions of the plan, and not everyone's happy with that. So I think they're not. There's certainly not a silver bullet to community planning. I wish they were more utilized. I think it's a good practice in general to do for your community, but I understand why people don't want to spend their time on that when they have a private application in front of them now. So I get it.
Okay, Joanna Bennett and Deborah, I want to mangle your name, Greis.
Okay, this is Joanna Bennett speaking. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm on Community Board 4. I'm a novice to housing and land use. Thank you for having this session. Community Board 4, we have had developers come before us, do presentations. They meet with the Housing and Land Use Committee. The committee is very good. We give stipulations. The board votes on for recommendations that the city approve them, only to turn around that these people then turn around and sell their property after they have gotten approval from the community boards. And so my question is about accountability. And what does the city do? I mean, we have been duped more than once. And we feel like fools after going through all of this process. And these people have a totally different agenda. They probably know that they're going to sell the property to someone else, and they've already gotten the approval of the city, and they got the rubber stamp, and they're moving forward. What happens at that point? I've never heard of the city then stepping in and revoking anything, forbidding the go forward of the development. And these people come into our communities and they do what they want to do. They play us for fools. Where is the accountability for this?
Yeah, I hear you. And one day you see your neighborhood and it looks one way, and then tomorrow there's a huge building that you never even knew could be built there. Or they come through Eulerp and they change the program after they're done. I've seen it. It's real. I get it. I think at city council, I worked at city council before for this job, and I worked in the land use division there, and we what on an unofficial note, they would have a commitment letter that they would give at the end of ULURP that hopefully incorporated all the concerns that were raised during ULURP. and the city council has a running record of those agreements that have been made. So ultimately, it'll be the city council that is really the one that is going to be the the gatekeeper, because the same applicant reps come to the city for approvals, and we have long memories. So as we learn from people who don't keep their end of the commitment. It's not a satisfactory answer, but it is what it is in terms of, like, at least from now, there are people who are tracking the commitments on that front that are unofficial. Now officially, through the ULURP process, I think if there are concerns that there's going to be an outcome maybe different than the community board expects and the applicant is describing, then that's when we would love for you to call us, reach out to us, and we can help identify potential actions that might provide more assurances to the community board about what it will be. There may be some opportunity, depending on the project and the size of the project. Some of the mitigation is incorporated into a restrictive declaration that is filed, that runs with the land on the property. So like CCC, the Innovation Cultural Center out in East New York, or Flatlands, they had a large scale special permit that I was mentioning before, because it's a large site, and they also have a restrictive declaration that's filed in the clerk's office. It runs with the land. So there can be mitigation that is identified. So they may have to set aside a portion of the site for SCA to build a school. And that might be outlined in saying that, SCA has the option to lease or purchase the property from the applicant. There may be some required open space that a normal zoning action would not require, but through that process, they would be required to do it with a restrictive declaration. So there are official ways that we can identify if their community board is concerned about that. And also during ULURP, if there are opportunities, we can also help identify if some of those changes can be made during ULURP. And we can talk about what's the best right solution for each action or each project that comes before you. But I think council is getting better at holding people accountable, and I think we're happy to help find ways of making the commitment as binding as possible. Because I think the borough president has had his own share of developers not keeping their commitments, so he's learned along that process as well.
Anthony, Mr. Ed?
Wait, didn't you call Deborah Gray?
I'm sorry, Deborah. Yes, I did. I'm sorry.
Okay. My question and concern is a person who has disabilities and now has to use mobility devices. You very rarely do any training on true accessibility and how the ADA really should be followed. And I know MOPED gives out that training, as well as the New York City Commission on Human Rights. But yet, when you bring it up to when they come before the board, is this property going to be accessible? Will it take away accessibility when you're building? Example, there's one in my community board, Avenue and Ocean Parkway. They moved my bus stop out of the way, which makes it hard for the bus driver to get me on and off. Plus, I don't know how many times they've messed things up for people with disabilities. They claim they won't take away access, and then we can't. They're building and they're doing it in such a way that it's so dangerous we can't get on and off the sidewalk. We can't get around. And then after they build it and claim it's truly accessible, you can't get into the site. If it was supposed to be an apartment building for low income and accessibility, can't get on, in or out, because it's not following. So what will this borough president do for this? It's a major issue.
I hear you, and I think we all know the city is not ADA compliant in almost anywhere, unfortunately, and I clearly they're trying to rectify that through small projects and big projects, but it's absolutely a concern. Every site should be accessible. I think hopefully in our conversations with applicants, we raise this issue and make sure that the site is safe for everyone to access. But if there's certain projects and certain concerns about a development, we're happy to, mediate a conversation around that. Buildings are supposed to be ADA compliant now. I think there's not a requirement for an elevator in smaller buildings. I think there's been talk about whether if that's going to, go anywhere. But it's certainly a concern. And if there's certain specific issue areas around that in your community, like I said, like moving the bus stop, making it more difficult for pickups, like we want to hear that stuff, and we want to highlight that to not only the applicants but also the city agencies. Like, that's DOT moving the bus stop, so not
Yeah,
only is
I
the
know.
CP at the table. Yeah.
But I would also appreciate that you should start doing ADA training for all all 59 community boards across the city. It is so outrageous. My late friend was on her community board in Manhattan. She was the only one who understood about the ADA. That's because also she was disabled. But it's
Yeah.
very frustrating. People look at me and go, so what do you want? You know what? I'm a taxpayer and I have the right to be able to get in and out of a building. I understand when something's very old, I got that. But even NYCHA, which is supposed to be, they warehouse tons of just people with disabilities and the elevators go out. So that's not always the solution too.
Yeah.
So we need
Yeah.
to really train all the boards so that these
Okay.
less and less these things can happen. Thank you.
Yeah, and I think you're totally right, and then I think we even on just digital presentations, I think we can also do better on that. So noted.
Yeah,
And
I had a hard time reading the Eulerp stuff because I was
yeah,
a visual and now was hard.
okay, I'll tell GCP that as well.
Thank you.
And we're happy to help on those things. So feel free to reach out.
Oh, yes. And just one more thing. My last name's pronounced Greif, and thank you for not trying to say it. I appreciate it. Thank you.
You go, girl.
Thank you, dear.
Okay,
I love it.
thank you for that. I think, was it Anthony that I called?
Yes.
Do you still have a?
I mean, I just had a question quickly in the chat about the city record notifications. Is that for all public hearings or just ULURP public hearings?
Certainly for Euler public hearings. Carol Ann, you'll have to help me on the other ones. I think the Borough Board does as well.
The city record, I've been told that notification is mandatory for ULURP matters. But if you have just a regular hearing, that it is not mandatory.
Yeah, like public hearings that are for matters that the board is going to vote on. It doesn't matter for those.
Yeah.
Okay. And is it 5 calendar days or 5 business days?
Let me check on that.
Okay.
Let me check on that. Yeah. Good question. Haven't heard that one yet.
I tend to err on the side of more when it comes to notification.
Right.
So I actually try, my base is 7 to 10 business days.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I think Daughtry?
Hi, thanks, Carol Ann. Great to see you. I'm Daughtry from Community Board 2. I will just defer. There's a lot of conversating in the chat, of which I'm a part, regarding how applicants can meet with community members and community boards before they're certified. It often feels, in addition to the timing constraints, that by the time it gets certified by Department of City Planning, it's already baked in. And I've heard you, John, mention multiple times that it's good for community boards to meet as often as possible with applicants before they get certified, but they don't necessarily always reach out. So is there a way that community boards can advocate for that? And can we ask that city planning be better at facilitating those pre-certification meetings?
Can I pop in 1 second before you answer Georgie, I just want to thank all the members who need to be on the call that starts at 7 p.m. for their council member orientation. Thank you so much for coming. Thank you for splitting your evening. And feel free to follow up with me with any questions that you may have for John. But I know you gotta go now. Thank you.
Yes, thank you everyone for taking the time tonight. I know you have busy lives, and so hopefully it's helpful in some way. But on the pre-meetings, we will certainly on our end encourage the applicants to reach out to you, and we can have if you all have a contact you want us to reach out to related to land use matters, you know, on a daily basis, please feel free to share that with Carol Ann. And we can sort of check in like once we've met with an applicant and say like, you know, we've met with them, have they met with you? You guys say no, then we can call them and be like, you know, you need to meet with the community board. You know, we need to hear that. And we try to get feedback from the applicant, like, have you met with the community board already? Have you met with the city council member? Have you met with the Department of City Planning? And try to get us a gauge on how much engagement they've done. And you know, I think if we would love to be a resource on that issue. I can certainly raise it with the Department of City Planning, as you know, they say their policy is to do that, and you know, they will probably likely say they can't control what applicants do or don't do. But I think, you know, I'll raise it again with them, and also hopefully we can stay in touch, as you know, they just, you know, they all reach out at random times at random people, and you know, it's a mess. So you know, we just have to stay in communication, I think. And so if there's a line of communication that we can keep open with your board, we'd love that.
I would just to follow up would suggest that become actual practice, that everything that comes, you know, that it gets in the pipeline for certification automatically goes out to the community boards, period.
Yep. No, and I think with a 30-day notice, we try to, that's one thing that might help, that the council passed that legislation that said that you can't certify an application until 30 days after that notice. So before ULURP happens, there's a 30-day period that, you know, they might, after that, they can certify. So we can flag those for the community board as well and say that we've noticed that it may be up for certification. Have you met with them? What was, you know, what are the concerns that you have? You know, have you talked to the council? You know, other folks, we can do that outreach too. If that might be the easiest way for the borough president's office to track it, because we don't, you know, the DCB doesn't tell us either what's coming down. So, you know, so that's what we can do is once we see that notice, we can reach out to the community boards and try to get your feedback and try to get the applicant in front of you as soon as possible.
Thank you.
I'm seeing some comments regarding that the state doesn't follow ULURP. Do you want to address that?
Oh yeah, I think we all know the dreaded GPP, the General Project Plan. This is so that we derive the right to regulate zoning because the state gave us the authority to, and they can take it back as they see fit. It's one of those state laws that we have to follow. So yeah, they can circumvent ULURP. I think most recently the high profile one was Amazon HQ2 in Long Island City. They tried to come in with a GPP, a general project plan that's a state version of changes to the ULURP to land use. They don't actually change zoning typically, they'll just impose their GPP on the site. So you may have an M3 district, but then the state comes in, and M3 is like the heaviest industrial uses. You know, you really don't have any residential uses allowed. But if the state comes in and does a general project plan, they can superimpose on top of our zoning other use allowances. So they could allow, you know, multifamily residential in that M3 if they get the GPP approved. That's it's a different public approval process. I think if you follow the Amazon HQ2 drama, you might have learned about the actors in that process. It's really with the state Senate that it comes down to funding, and that that's how the previous administration had it in the governor's office. I'm not sure how they do it now, and then in this current governor's office, but they're right. The state can superimpose itself on us, and that's when you have to get the state electeds involved. The city really can't do much about that. The city planning commission can they can ask the state to incorporate more considerations and do a little bit more research, but they can't inevitably stop the GPP. So typically the city planning commission will write its comments, its opinion on what needs to be incorporated into the project. And so city planning commission would also be the body that would be the official response from the city to the state.
Thank you. I don't see any more questions. Did I possibly miss a question or a hand? If I did, please feel free.
I had my hand raised.
Yeah. Nicole?
Yes. I've been hearing rumblings about Adams kind of overhauling the zoning for a while now. Do you have any sense of if that is actually happening? A, B, if it is there any opportunity for community boards to intercept that or shape that in any way? And then C, if and when that does happen, are there plans to sort of package that up in ways that we can distribute and understand?
I'll try to do my best on this one. So the mayor's plan is encapsulated in the city of Yes. And so I just sent a link with how he's describing it. I think he's putting it into 3 different zoning text amendments. Zoning text amendments, like I said, are typically, they're not ULURP. So the city planning commission would refer these out to the community boards for a certain period of time. I believe it's at the discretion of the chair of the city planning commission. So there may be some conversation about making sure that comment period is as long as is needed to solicit appropriate feedback. Depending on what the proposals are, I don't know exactly what they're proposing in these things. But they're text amendments, and so they'll likely be referred out to community board, and then the city planning commission isn't on a timeline to actually get those approved, so they can hold on to those text amendments for a while. So it's a little bit of a different process than ULURP, and so we should maybe do like a formal just how is zoning text amendments different than zoning map amendments. And just so that you all understand just how it's a little different, but it's substantively different than like a rezoning of a neighborhood. And these would probably go to the borough board since they'll affect multiple community boards. So I would expect the full borough board would need to act on the text amendments. And like I said, I think the community boards are free to have their own public hearings on those text amendments, but if they apply to more than one community board, will need the borough board resolution and vote for that for the official Euler process. So we'll work with Carol Ann to facilitate that and make that happen with you all related to that. I believe they're planning on doing some community engagement. I think we have not been briefed on this project yet. So once we have any information that we can distribute, we certainly will pass it along. We're eagerly waiting as well. But I believe that they're going to look at changes to parking minimums, to some of the other bulk rules that are underlying them, and then looking at ways to, facilitate green energy projects, and then also supporting businesses. So those are like the 3 buckets he has. And so as we hear more, we'll certainly share as much as we can, and we'll encourage the administration to reach out to the community board leadership to review these proposals. But at this point, I would just be speculating. I don't really know.
Any other questions? Suki, did you want to ask a question?
Yeah, regarding the zoning text amendments versus zoning map amendments, I did want to ask you about that because I think that my reading of the charter is that with the text amendments, like you said, they don't have to go through ULURP, but they do have to notify all of the property owners within a certain number of feet of that would be affected. And like if a certain number of them submit opposition, it has to be passed by a supermajority of the council or something like that. But I don't know if you have any comment, because we just so rarely see these text amendments that, you know, I've never seen this process in action.
Yeah, no, I will check back on that. I'm not exactly sure how Department of City Planning says that they satisfy that portion of the rules. So let me get back to you about that. But I'm familiar with the concept. I just need to look at it a little closer. So yeah, there is a distinct difference in that process. So let me take a look at that.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yeah.
Okay, seeing no other questions and no new hands, I think we're close to the end. So like I said earlier, this is just another in the series of our sessions, our educational sessions. We will be building off of each class. So this was sort of like ULURP Light, ULURP 101, according to John, because we understand it's probably one of the more complex things that community board members will be reviewing. And so we're taking suggestions for how to build off of this ULURP training. The very next class is not going to be ULURP, but we are building this up as we go along. So I want to thank you all for taking the time to join us. I hope that you found this very educational. There's always something to learn when doing ULURP. Thank you, Sarah, for those suggestions. We'll note them. I'd like to thank not just John and his team that put together this presentation for us, but our guy behind the scenes, our IT guy who's always there. We don't see him, but I don't want to forget acknowledging Jesus Marshall. And thank you all. Good night. Please stay safe and see you around.
Good night.
Good night. Thanks, Carol Ann and John.
Good night.
Thank you so much, y'all. Anytime.
Good night, guys.
Good night,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Great info, thank you.
Thank you very much. Looking
Good
forward
night.
to the information.
Bill Flournoy.
Thanks, everyone.
Yes.
That was awesome.
Good night,
Thank
everyone.
you. Good night.
Good night.
Bye.
Good night. Miss you, Caroline.
Good night.
Yes, Bill, I miss you too.
Good night.
Thank you. Good
This
night.
presentation
Good night.
available for review on video.
Everybody get home safe.
Thanks. Indeed. Be well, everyone.
The recording. How did you get them?
Ask them.
Ask them if they would screen.